Hi everybody, this is Jurius Doctor, and this is going to be a short video on overview settings. This is a video that I've been meaning to make for a while, largely due to the fact that I get a lot of requests about this, and there's not a lot of great videos out there covering this topic. I'm on CC today in the 6C combat system, just cloaked up in a covop so I can have a little privacy while doing this, and so that I'm not mucking around with my overview settings I've spent so much time setting up on my primary account. So here I am in space, and I want to cover some basic items from the glossary before we get started, because these words should fall into common use, but the meaning is not always implicit for noobros. If you're new to the game, whether you are or not, I'd like you to be able to watch what I'm doing and see and connect the idea of what I'm doing to the actual words that are being used, something which isn't always perfectly communicated even by some of the teaching organizations within EVE. Since I started off in EVE University, I'm going to show you some of the stuff that was shown to me by them. Not everybody does these things these ways, but it's good for you to have a good overview. So to begin, I have already reset my overview settings to their default. This overview setup is kept very, very simple. You can see I have my command button here, my capacitor and overview sensor settings all set back to default. And the only custom thing that I've done here is to hide my passive modules. In this case, I'm going to display them again. So this is a basic exploration fit. There's nothing fancy to this. It's got a Covops cloak, it's an anathema, I have some sensor probes, I got a data analyzer, prop mod, a couple sensor mods, and some basic stuff here for fitting purposes. Now, a couple of things that you need to know about your HUD, or heads-up display. Your heads-up display is, by definition, everything you see here. Basically, it's your interface with the game, your GUI, or your graphical user interface. But within the context of EVE, your HUD is the space you can see and your command button. I call it a command button. Other people will use different words for this. This is your capacitor, it's your health levels, it's everything all in one place, and these can be repositioned. So you can go ahead and change various settings about how you interface with space, what information is shown to you, such as your tactical overlay, your tactical camera, which allows you to separate the camera from your physical or geographic position so that you can observe things happening in the battle in different places. To recenter on yourself, you simply return to your orbit camera. You can also view and access your cargo. Neat. A lot of people will know this if they're miners, but if you right-click, you can choose which hold or bay is being tracked. If you only have the one cargo hold in that ship, then it's only going to show the cargo hold as your tracked cargo hold. If, however, you have more than one hold, like you have an ore hold or you have a fleet hangar, you can right-click there and choose to show the status of those other holds. This button here will fill up with a blue color, kind of like the backlight on this guy here is the actively selected camera setting. This will slowly fill up with blue to show as a fraction how full your hold is, which is extremely handy for miners because when you're mining you'll see how full that becomes. You can also access your scanners from here. You can see your moon and probe analysis, directional scanner, probe scanner, and solar system. You also have the ability to switch into first-person camera, which, while fun, I think still needs some fleshing out by CCP. And then you have your autopilot button, which basically you should ignore. Anybody who tells you otherwise, just tell them to take a hike. Do not use autopilot ever. If you have to use autopilot, you're really playing this game the wrong way. The reason for that is that number one, it warps you into a gate at a distance, which increases exponentially your chance of being blapped. And second, it's just lazy. If you're going to play the game, play the game. Now, other things I can show you here. You have an options hamburger menu. Anytime I say the words hamburger menu, I'm referring to these little horizontal lines in a stack of 4 that you find in the top of every window except your chat window. That guy there, this guy up here. Most windows will have this hamburger menu, and this is where you can go in and alter your setting. So I can go in and I can choose to hide or display my passive modules, to hide or display empty slot. If I display empty slots, I can see that I have an empty high power slot on this ship. I can choose to display my readouts, which then shows me how much percentage-wise of my shield, armor, and hull health I have left. For me, that's mostly just extra visual noise. You can choose to display or hide your zoom buttons, display or hide your module tooltips, and so on. I can also align the HUD to the top. I call this the command button because really, in proper terms, the HUD is everything I'm looking at. This is really just my interface for my ship and my camera angles. It's not properly the whole HUD. So I really dislike this naming convention, and really most of the time I prefer to leave this on the bottom. Now, you can reposition all of these windows, and you can change your settings to match whatever particular eccentricities you have. I mean, if you're somebody who's, left-eye dominant, you want to have all your menus off to the left, excellent, great job for you. You can even reposition where selected items will show up in your field of view. But there's a couple of extra things that you need to know, other than just this basic orientation on the heads-up display. First is that before you go setting up your overview settings, you need to know you have 2 separate windows which are going to be involved all of the time. The first of those is the selected item window. That's this guy here, and this is what will give you options on how to interact with objects when you click on them. So if I click on this Fortizar over here, I can see its distance, I can see the 6-taxi name of this particular Fortizar. I'm given options to align to it, to warp to it at my default distance, my dock options. If I was on the same grid as it, I could orbit it, keep it at range, lock it as a target. I can look at it, track it, and show info. Now, most of the time you're not going to use this little I button to show info. You're just going to right click and say show info. And here we have the information on this Citadel. Now, as with before, I have an actions or a hamburger menu button up here at the top left that gives me extra options that I can engage with to see more information on this Citadel. It gives me options basically which are presented in the selected item window, but it could also give me options such as setting it as a destination, saving its location as a bookmark, finding that particular type of object in contracts so that if I wanted to buy a Fortizar of my own, I could do so, and I can even simulate the structure to see how it's set up. Now, when it comes to actually clicking on those objects, you'll see that there's an overview window. Now, this overview window can be customized. By default, you get 3 tabs: General, Mining, and Warp 2. In this, by default, you have a object icon, which will give you the name of the thing you're looking at when you mouse over it. Each of these icons is different, and each of these icons means a different thing. Then you have distance, the name of the object that you can see in space, the type of object it is, and these types will correspond with the icons that you can see. So while this is a generic Citadel icon, this specific icon type refers to the keep star. The Sotio will have its own icon, which is distinct from an Asbel or a Retard. And as will be the case as of the upcoming October 24th patch, you can see the 3 new types of moon refineries, including the Athanor and the Tatara. Sorry, 2 new types, Athanor and Tatara. Now, the interesting things that come out of this is that depending on how many things you've crammed into your overview, this can become a lot of noise, especially in systems that are high population. So if you land on grid in Jita and there's 1,600 to 2,000 people in local and a ton of them undocked, finding something in this list can be very, very difficult if you don't filter your view into different tabs. And most overview settings groups will have accommodated for that by having preset logical groups of selected filters for you to jump through depending upon the situation that currently apply. The 2 most popular overview sets that you'll find out there will typically either be Sarashawa or another large groups, and these are typically corporate alliance specific. So Goonswarm has their own overview setups, Eve University has their own overview setups. Everybody pretty much has their own flavor, slightly modified one way or the other. Because I began with Eve University, I'll show you my overview setting that I use, which I borrow from them, and I will also show you how to access Sarashawa's. Now, Sarashawa's is easy to get to. It's very, very simple. It's simply go to your Mail tab, click Add Mailing List, and then type in Overview. Then click Join. Now, if you're already a member of this list, you'll get this message. I already am. However, when you first join this, you're going to get a message down here in your notification saying you have a new mail from Overview. And when you click on it, you're going to see the Welcome to the Sarashawa Overview Pack with some basic instructions. But the very first thing you're going to do is click all the links below in order, starting at the top, and this will load in the settings for the Sarashawa Overview Pack. If you want to get the Eve University Overview Pack, you simply go to your Open Chat channel window, type in overview.etacuni, and hit Join. And the same sort of instructional text will appear, this time in the channel message of the day, or MOTD. The same settings basically will be applied here. You pick your setting groups in order and it will apply them to the overview window and settings. But before you can go ahead and do this, you have to go into the overview settings, which can be accessed here. And then go to the Miscellaneous tab and click Reset All Overview Settings. This is a necessary first step. Now, from here, simply click the required first steps in order. So start with Base, and then click Additional, and then choose the optional presets you want, and then click your choice of either of the 2 final color codings. Now, the first time you click on one of these, it's going to ask you if you want to load the overview profile. So you simply click Yes. Now, clicking this first one has added my basic tabs as PvP, Travel, Situational, Fleet, and Pod Saver. These are 5 logical groups that make a lot of sense and can be very, very useful for when you're getting around in space. From here, what we add in is the basic preset. Now, this won't appear to have changed much, but what it's done is it's added in some additional beacons and other items in space into the overview in each of the tabs. Then from here, choosing these optional presets will give me additional options for how to view, identify, and track other types of ships in space. Now, if you're in a high-sec corporation and you never leave high-sec, it's very unlikely that you're going to need PvP capital ship. You're probably only going to need subcap ships, fleetmates, and non-fleetmates. If you live in nullsec, click all 4 of these, or in wormhole. And then last but not least, you have your choice between a plain overview final setup or a color-coded final overview setup. By clicking that, what it's going to do is it's going to apply some fancy HTML, which is going to go in and color code and provide icons to each of these tabs and to some of your grouping. And now you can see that PvP has this little, look like a little asteroid or missile projectile icon, followed by PvP. Travel has a little picture of an airplane here. Situational just looks like a little glove pointing. Fleet, you get a star, command star, and pod saver, you get this little happy face. This is sort of just to set you up and to make these quickly identifiable. You do have a maximum of 8 tabs you can configure, and I do have a separate one I set up just for mining, and I'll show you how to set those up now. Now, even though I've added in these overview settings, and I can now go and close this window, I don't have a finished product here. What I have is 80-20. I've gotten 80% of the work done for 20% of the effort. I opened up a chat window, went to that overview, went through and clicked in all the settings. I've loaded most of the work, but I still have that last 20% of work to get done. It hasn't taken a lot of effort so far, but this last little bit's going to be where some of the niggly little finishing touches come in. And these are what's going to make your overview settings usable for you, whether you're loading E-University, Sarashawa, or somebody else's overview setting. So again, we're going to go back to the overview settings tab here, up here in the hamburger menu. And the first thing you're going to do is go to your overview tab. Now, one thing you'll notice is that the moment I added these overview settings and color coded them, all of the engineering complexes and citadels and stations fell off of my first overview. The PvP tab does not contain those by default under the E-University setting. I can still identify them in space. And if I go down here to my sensor overlay, that's this little ring around the command button, this guy here is color-coded in accordance with the objects in space. As I turn, like a compass, it rotates to identify the colored brackets around the objects in space. Blue for structures, green for anomalies, red for signatures, and so on. Each one of these little colored dashes in this ring is coincided with one of these objects in space that I can mouse over and show info on or highlight. I can turn these off so to make them invisible. I can make those drop out of my field of view. However, when removing them from the field of view, all it's doing is it's hiding the bracket. It's hiding the color coding and the highlight around those objects that make them easier to identify. The brackets themselves, however, the objects in space, like this Sotillo here, are still visible. And these, what we call brackets, or the icons for these items in space and the identifiers around them, these are commonly as a group called brackets. So there's the object icon in space, which can be hidden and revealed. And then there's the sensor overlay bracket that coincides with that type of structure, which can also be revealed and hidden. This is a little bit difficult for some new players to grasp, but I hope that I'm doing a good job of presenting this to you. but they are indeed separate things called by the same name. The objects that you can see in space that are not on the same grid as you are referred to as brackets. And your bracket settings are different from the settings, or capable of being different from the settings in your overview tab. So I can have an overview tab that will just show me enemy ships that are on the same grid as myself, but have my brackets in space light up for literally anything I can warp to. That's where these two columns come in. So the first is your tab name, and this is where all the fancy HTML and color coding and so on go in to make these setups appear. This is its own group of settings. These are essentially the labels for these tabs. Then you have your overview presets. So this is what groups of information, what filters are being applied to the information that shows up in this window. And then there's the bracket preset. And right now it's showing everything for all of these because that's the default. And this is where some of that customization comes in. So if I wanted to change my default overview preset for PvP, I can go in and then choose a different PvP set. One of the nice things about how the EVE University overview works is that they've very clearly identified and grouped these by name. I'll show you that now. So if you mouse over the tab, or if you expand this list, so mouse over and right click and say load preset to tab, you can see once you've added all of the E-UNI tabs, it's a very, very long list of configurations. They're all numbered and coded correspondingly. So if I want to see PvP, I have a few options to choose from. I have capitals group, I have a PvP hostile group, I have PvP travel, I have fleet mates. I've got a bunch of different options here. But to keep it simple, what I'm going to do is set this to PvP with drone. And then for my bracket preset, I'm going to set PvP travel. Plus stations plus citadel. That's what this plus T or T plus ST plus CT stands for. So I have 1.02 and 2.01 as my overview and my bracket. So this way I still get all of my brackets around my various citadels and stations and so on in space. But in my overview preset right now, what I have is PvP plus drone. Now, what I'm going to need to do in order to make travel possible in this group is to either change this to match the 2.0.1, which will include PvP group, this group here, plus stations and so on, towers, stations, and citadel, or I can manually add in the objects in space. And the easiest way to do that is to right-click in space, go over the thing I want to add, in this case stations, and then choose Add Station to Overview. Now that I've added Station to Overview, I can see the station that I want to warp to. I can repeat this process for citadels, engineering complexes, and so on. And now, as before, I have all of my various beacons, citadels, engineering complexes, and refineries visible in my overview. Now, the next thing I'm going to want to do is to repeat that process for PvP travel, for situational fleet and pod safety. And I can do that either using this window, the overview settings, or I can right click on the tab itself and choose the preset and brackets that I want to set up, both for the tab and for the bracket. In this case, just to make things easier, I'm going to do it that way. I'm going to leave the situational as missions and show all bracket. And for fleet, I'm leaving it as fleet mates, and I'm going to change the bracket to show all. Now I can choose to also add in my blues so that my blues just show up in space. And then in DScan or Pod Saver, I like to, for the sake of keeping this clean and having things to warp to and away from, I like to actually move off of the Pod Saver setting that Eve University has set up. And what I do is I simply remove anything I don't want. I actually remove orbital infrastructure. And the reason for that is that it's far too common for people to go to the POCOs or towers and end up landing on grid with an enemy fleet who's, realized that's where they were heading. And I add in moons. And how you do that is you go to planets, you add moons to your overview. And this will only add them to the overview tab you have presently selected. So now I have a much larger list of objects that I can warp to if I need to get out of a fight in a hurry. I just pick one at a random distance and right click and warp. Or click and choose warp to, or hold down the S key and click on it. Multiple ways to skin a cat. Now when it comes to adding a new tab, that's really quite easy. You can click here to add a new tab and then it will ask you to name it, or you can define those settings here.
Hey, wake up.
Now here at the bottom of the list I have mining as an option. In addition, there's general, all, drones, loot, and so on, including PvP. Those are CCP's default settings. I'm not a big fan, but for mining it works fine. Now when I click on the mining tab, I see all the nearby asteroid belts. If I warp to within 100 of one of those belts, which I'll do now, you should be able to see all the individual asteroids shown up on that overview setting as well. And there's a particular reason why I want to show you this with the mining belts. This is particularly useful for industrialists and miners. Is that when you land on grid, there are certain camera settings that you can enable that will give you a better view of where the objects are in that belt. And that is your tactical overlay, which is clicked here or by pressing Control D. So if you're within range of a belt and there are asteroids on field with you, you can actually show the presence of those in your overview, and they'll show up as objects on your overview. They will plot a placement just like the beacon here. Now it looks like this particular belt's been mined out or hasn't spawned, but in an ordinary belt, and you can try this out in any system you're in, warp to an asteroid belt, show your tactical overlay and then load up a mining tab for yourself, and all of your various asteroids will plot out in an arc, and those brackets will be visible in space. Now, in terms of tab presets, you can go into those presets and you can add and remove individual objects. This is the manual way of going through and clicking those objects in and out. So do you want to be able to see mobile cyno inhibitors? Which deployables individually by class do you want to add and remove? Which types of fighters? Do you want to be able to see fighters? Are you going to be fighting cat? Do you want to see certain sovereignty structures? What if I want to be able to see infrastructure hubs, sovereignty blockade units, and territorial claim units in my mining tab? So depending upon which tab you've selected, this settings will change. So if I return to sovereignty structures in the situational tab, those show up. If I choose the PvP tab, same thing. Here I can see there are fighters, 3 fighters left out in space nearby. Right there. The appearance of tabs controls what items will show up and how they're identified, both by background color, font, icon, and whether that icon is flashing a particular color or not. Now, the color tag and the background for these is defined along a set of pre-agreed upon settings, generally and universally understood by players. If somebody has a red background, they're very obviously your enemy, or have been declared as your enemy by your corporation or alliance, or they are actively at war with you, meaning that they have paid a bribe to Concord so that they can fight you anywhere in space, even in high sec. If somebody is flashing orange, then they're at war with your group, or they're in a limited engagement with you, or potentially they are a criminal. Same goes for color tags, which is the color of the icon. If a player has a security status below -5, that will also flash. You can control these, you can change these colors, but these have been set up for you along these predefined sets of groups. What happens, though, that you need to change is the priority of when these show up. One of the things that the EVE University overview used to have as a problem was that when you added it, when you were in fleet with people, sometimes if you were in a public fleet, like a Rome with Bomber's Bar, if you were in the fleet with somebody who is presently at war with your corporation, their current status as an enemy of yours would show up in red, despite the fact that they should be purple because they're in fleet with you. You can change this priority simply by dragging and dropping the placement of these so that you set the priority of fleet above the fact that they're at war with you. It's a small setting to change, but it's very, very important for your situational, fleet, and PvP tab. Once you've done that, you can simply click close, and your settings are good to go. You can further customize it from here, and you can get into the weeds on this in a big way, but really in this last half hour, I think I've covered everything that you should need to know about modifying, setting up, and using your overviews in a general way. Again, just to cover this as one last point, you can change which brackets you're presently seeing by right-clicking on the tab you want to change, choosing Load Preset to Brackets, and then choosing the group filter that you want to use. If you're somebody who doesn't really want to muck with this and you don't really care, just set everything to all. Having it set to all will show you everything all the time in space, but leave your overview settings fairly clean. That can help, but again, it can also add a little bit of latency in systems with high population or high number of objects. My name is Jurius Doctor. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you have, please like. And if you want to have say into what kind of videos I make in the future, please click subscribe. Thank you very much, and please recommend me to your friends.